Hi guys, today here we are with Jessica, who is our UCAT mentor, to share her insight and expertise on UCAT preparation to all prospective UK medical applicants. Thanks for your time here with us, Jessica. If you could briefly introduce yourself, that would be awesome.
Okay. Hello, my name is Jessica. I took my UCAT exam in 2020 and I started my medical studies in 2021 at University of Birmingham.
Let's start with the nitty-gritties of UCAT. What is this test about?
UCAT is an abbreviation for University Clinical Aptitude Test. It assesses cognitive skills, decision-making skills, and situational judgment skills for medical school and dental school applicants. It's not only for UK, but it's also for New Zealand and Australia.
It's also for New Zealand and Australia. I'm assuming UK had its impact on multiple countries in its colonial era. Are the tests taken in Australia and New Zealand identical to the UCAT or slightly different?
The questions that the students will get are identical, but New Zealand and Australian UCAT gives a little more time than UK UCAT exams.
Okay, so that means, we'll talk about this in more details, but UCAT's difficult because of like the no time you have. So technically speaking, UCAT taken in Australia and New Zealand would be easier.
Yes.
Okay. So you've mentioned that UCAT assesses the 4 areas. Let's talk a bit more details about them. What are the key challenges in each of the 4 sections? And how can students effectively prepare for them?
So to begin with, the very first section, verbal reasoning assesses reading comprehension skills in students. The key challenge here is the short amount of time that the students get for each question. Probably it's only a minute or a minute and 30 seconds for each question, but the text is quite long. So the biggest challenge here is finding the keywords and identifying the answer within that short period of time. And the text changes every 5 questions. So that is most challenging, but by just practicing finding the keywords, for example, the numbers or names of stuff, that will definitely help them answering the questions in a significantly shorter time than they expected.
So like if you're a fast reader, because you mentioned how the texts are quite long, obviously there's a big advantage.
Yes.
And if you're a slow reader like me, there will be a big disadvantage.
Yes.
Okay. Were you a fast reader?
Slow reader.
Slow reader.
Yes.
So if it's disadvantageous, what do you need to prepare? How can you fasten up your speed at tackling this verbal reasoning?
The easiest way is definitely reading a lot of text for preparation. If you start reading a lot of text, then that will actually increase your speed of reading itself. And as I mentioned, finding the keywords is really important here because most of the questions will definitely ask you something that you might expect. For example, as I said, numberings, number of the year, number of people, number of percentage. That would be a very big hint in order to answer the question. So that is the way that students can prepare.
I mean, it's not like we can get any help from biology class on this, right? I'm assuming the context of these texts will be slightly scientific?
Not really. Some of them can be historical.
Historical?
Yes, some of them can be, it can be biological, it can be scientific, it can sometimes be just a novel. So it really depends on which text you get.
Now, I was just going to ask if, all of that school studies do help at all, but I don't think in any A-level class, IB class, or even AP class, you learn to, on the short period of time, pinpoint the keyword out of a context.
Not really.
So you really have to, outside school, prepare for UCAT. Okay.
So if we move on to the next section, it's decision making.
Okay.
It assesses whether students can do logical thinking. So again, time is a big problem, but sometimes students make a wrong logical thinking answer, conclusion. One example would be the question kind of hinted an information, but they didn't really mention it, then that would be a no, because we can only hint it, but we can't conclude as a fact. So that is kind of a mistake that many students make. So these kind of logical thinking skills can be practiced by first starting slowly, like just going through all the steps of logical thinking and then reaching to a conclusion. And later on, each student will definitely develop their own strategy for going through the logical questions.
Okay. I think this might be a silly question, but you know how there are people who are good at making decisions, and then people who are really bad at making decisions, like non-decisive people. Are those people going to be disadvantaged in decision making?
Not really. It's more about logical thinking. Like if you can say this is a fact or not, that would be the most important quality here.
Okay, sorry, that was a silly question.
It's fine.
Okay, so moving on.
Next one is quantitative reasoning, measuring the mathematical calculation skills.
Okay.
The biggest challenge here is using the calculator on the screen, because it's not a physical calculator that we always use at school. So we have to practice using the keyboard shortcuts. So that is something that can help you answering the questions in QR.
Sorry, about calculator usage using keyboard shortcuts. Isn't so? Do you have to, is there like a specific shortcuts you have to memorize on the keyboard?
Yes. Sometimes, for example, when you want to put a root, then there's a shortcut for that.
So instead of using your mouse to navigate to that root sign, you can use shortcuts.
Yes.
Okay. I guess that's going to be really, really important in minimizing the time expenditure.
Yes.
Okay.
And the last one is SJT, Situational Judgment Test. It assesses whether people can make a good choice and know which one is ethically good and ethically bad. So that is an exam that many students get confused at, because some questions can assess which one is most appropriate. But that can be very, very judgmental based on each person. So in order to practice that, many cases that they give in the UCAT exam are quite similar. So just understanding the pattern of questions would be actually helpful.
I want to go back to quantitative reasoning, and again, back to verbal reasoning. To me, it sounds like there's the English aptitude test and math aptitude test. Let's say you're good at math. I'm guessing most medical school applicants will be good at math, scientists. And there will be some amongst this population of students who are good at English writing, reading, mediocre, and even some who are bad reading and writing. Especially those international students whose mother tongue is not English and have only recently started international education. What is like the disadvantage, let's say, international students with non-native English proficiency will have in verbal reasoning?
Absolutely, they might actually get disadvantaged because some vocabularies can be a question, like it's unclear, and the time constraint might cause them some panic because it's not their mother tongue. But when I went to medical school and when I talked with my friends, not only international students but home students also face difficulty in verbal reasoning because it's really time constrained. So it's not just the issues of mother tongue, but all students have the issue of finding the key words in the question. So not a big disadvantage, but if the international students aren't really familiar with the key vocabularies in the text, that might be a disadvantage for them.
Okay. And what are the math questions asked in quantitative reasoning? Is it something that international students like from China, Korea, are usually good at, let's say, what do you call it? Not using calculations, like calculations in your head. So would that really help with the fast-paced, time-constrained quantitative reasoning?
That does help for some extent, but because of that, some students might overpace themselves and try to answer the questions fast. So they might not look at the question and just answer the questions, just looking at the numbers. But that is a big mistake because many of the questions in quantitative reasoning requires a table, analysis of the graph, and interpretation of the graph. So taking your time, not just thinking about calculating in your mind, but also understanding the questions itself is really important. So sometimes students make a mistake of over-pacing themselves.
Okay. But we can say that, different groups of students will have different potentials across these 4 different sections of UCAT.
Yes.
Now let's move on to, let's say, the performance outcomes. How are the, let's say, gradings done? What are the grade structures like?
So the cognitive exams assess the students based on a scale of 300 to 900, where 300 is the lowest and 900 is the highest. So since they're verbal reasoning, decision making, and quantitative reasoning, that adds up to 2,700 in total. And SJT is measured by 4 different bands. Band 4 being the lowest and band 1 being the highest. So many universities do require, some universities actually require band 1 in SJTs.
The highest grade.
Yes.
And what if you, let's say, do decently in cognitive section? So out of 2,700, let's say you've hit 2,500, but you've got like band 2 or 3. What happens?
The universities that require band 1 might consider you as an interviewee, but most likely they won't because SJT is the one that considers the ethical decision makings.
Oh.
So that is a really important quality as a future doctor or a future dentist.
Does it mean you're a bad person if you get band 4 in SJT?
Not really. Like you're not necessarily a bad person, but maybe your ethical thinking might be wrong.
A bit out of
Yes.
social standards.
Yeah.
Okay, if that's the case, let's go back to the cognitive section. Out of 2,700, what should you be targeting?
I would recommend 2,200 as a target.
2,200, okay.
Yes.
2,200. So a high score is considered 2,200 with a band 1.
Yes.
Okay. And let's talk about the significance of this UCAT performance grade outcome on your overall medical school application.
UCAT, if we talk about in a continued time period, UCAT before your interview, before your offer to interview is the most important part in your application process, as some universities don't really read your personal statement, but just rank the students and shortlist them based on your UCAT scores. So it's really important before the interviews. As soon as you get your interview offer, then your interview scores are the most important thing in your application, as many universities don't consider the step 1 before the interview grades, and they just only use the interview grades. So that is the timeline. And after you get your interviews, then some universities might take additional exams. For example, University of Birmingham had a math exam. So those scores all add up together and allow the universities to give an offer to a student.
But generally speaking, UCAT grade is like the basis for deciding whether to invite shortlist students to interview or not. Okay. And depending on the university's specific needs, for example, some universities may decide to have higher weightage of UCAT score along with interview performance in deciding the admissions results, while others might just use UCAT to invite.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so clearly UCAT is quite important because you first need to be invited to the interview, and we want to do well in UCAT. To do well in UCAT, how much effort should you input to UCAT preparation, like in terms of time duration, and within that time duration, how much on a daily, weekly basis?
I would recommend all students to study for around 6 to 8 weeks. So if I give them a timeline from week 1 and 2.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
So let's say that most students take UCAT in August or September.
Mm-hmm.
So you're basically saying during your summer holiday.
Yes,
Okay.
during the summer holidays. So the very first 2 weeks, I would recommend them to practice an untimed questions and just get to know the questions that UCAT will give. And for the next 2 weeks, they should start the timed practice and learn from their mistakes by understanding why they made this mistake and what pattern they lost from that question. And the next 2 weeks, I would recommend them to do at least one mock at the end of the week in order to visualize their progress. And the last 2 weeks, probably doing mock exams every day in order to understand the real exam setting and how time constrained it is, how much they can do in the entire duration of the UCAT exam.
Okay, essentially you've outlined a study plan. A study plan that is composed of 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, over 4, let's say, phases of 8 weeks. And I can tell how you're emphasizing the significance of timed practice since you're starting that from the second phase onwards. What are the resources that students can use to prepare for UCAT? I heard that there's one like app that most people use, and if you don't use that, you're like out of the league.
Medify?
Medify?
Yes.
Is that true? Like if you don't use Medify, you're like not preparing it properly?
Medify is actually a really good source because you can see how many questions you answered each day. You can see your progress. You can even see your expected grades in the website as well. But not using Medify doesn't mean that you're not preparing properly. It means that you're just using a different method. But there are many other platforms that students can use. So it depends on which platform just fits you more.
Okay. I think there's a definite advantage in being able to visualize your progress. I'm assuming the platforms, let's say, saving the data of your problem sets. What if you don't want to use Medify, let's say, because of the costs involved?
There's other options that are less costly than Medify, so some students can use those resources. But I think Medify is actually quite cost effective. It does give you enough information with that cost because you can see how many questions you did each day, as I said, and they give you an expected grade every day.
Okay.
And if you see the progress of increasing, that also gives you just a motivation to study as well. And if you didn't answer some questions each day, then you can just see and give yourself a feedback that I have to practice a little bit more.
So I basically asked you for an alternative to Medify, and you didn't give me an alternative. You stuck with Medify. You're basically saying you must use Medify. Okay. All right, so you must use Medify. What are the common mistakes UCAT test takers make?
The biggest common mistake is not preparing under timed conditions because UCAT exam, as I highlighted many times, it is really time constrained. So practicing under the time is really important. And not learning from your mistake is also a really big mistake that many students make because UCAT gives a quite limited amount of patterns in their questions. So if you learn the patterns beforehand, and if you get those things in the exams, that will actually decrease the amount of time that you spend in one question and even help increasing your score as well. So learning from your mistakes is really important.
Okay. Let's say you tried your best. You've given UCAT preparation your best shot, but on the test date, it didn't work out, and you didn't get the ideal results. And you can only take UCAT once a year. But what options do you have?
As there are many different universities, you might apply to lower universities that don't weigh UCAT as much as any other universities. That would be an option. But if you wish to take a gap year, then you can absolutely retake your UCAT by preparing for a little longer time and to get yourself ready and not make the same mistake as you did the previous year. So I think that would be an option as well.
Okay. Well, Jessica, I think there was a lot of things to take away from your insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I hope all the test takers, who've watched this interview, would utilize as much of the expertise insight Jessica has shared. Best of luck, and thank you very much
Thank
again,
you.
Jessica, for your time.